I want to welcome everybody to the meeting, and I want to take a moment to recognize and thank Bert Hudson for his support. He has had surgery and wasn't able to be here, but we know he's watching online. So hi, Bert. We're praying for your healing. And I also want to thank the Elk City City Manager, Tom Ivister, for the use of the City Hall. He's always very willing to let us have meetings in here anytime we want, no charge, and so I appreciate him so much. And then Senator Casey Murdoch, District 27, is going to be here, and also Nick Archer, Representative Nick Archer, District 55, is going to be here. They both contacted me this afternoon. They have so many bills in committees right now that they could not make it out here from Oklahoma City. But believe me, they are interested. Nick told me today that he is willing to sponsor. Casey Murdoch is sponsoring a Senate Bill 980 about all this stuff, and Nick told me today he's more than happy to sponsor it on the House side. So we have a lot of interest, but we need to encourage our senators and House of Representatives that we mean business, and we're interested in what's going on, and we're educated. So that's what this meeting is about, is to educate ourselves and to understand we do have a voice out here. And so I would want to thank all the county commissioners, sheriffs, and the elected officials that are here. Do we have a lot of elected officials, county commissioners? Would you, where are y'all all from?
Chester County, District 10.
Okay. I know Roger Mills is here. That's my guys over there. Anybody else? Any other county commissioners?
I want to introduce myself real quick. I'm Thomas Forbes. I'm with Senator Mark Wayne Holden's office.
Oh, okay.
I just joined this team 3 weeks ago. I'll cover the southwest part of the state for them. I'm excited to meet you guys and work with you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's awesome. That's awesome. So your presence is so important to all of the people of your counties that you elected to protect, that they elected for you to protect them. In this meeting, I want to inform us, if Angel's going to inform us about the 30-30 land grab that has been taking place in Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. And she's going to educate us on how to be prepared what's coming for Oklahoma. This hasn't happened in Oklahoma, but we can be proactive and stop or put resolutions or like bills in place to stop the 30-30 agenda. So if you don't know what the 30-30 agenda is, Biden wants to control 30% of the land by 2030. So you know what happens if to control the people, you have to control the land. You control the land, you control the food supply. So that's what we're here for, to educate ourselves. And I want to send a special thank you out to my Roger Mills County officials. I'm very proud to be from Roger Mills County. They've already signed their resolution to protect me and all the other landowners in Roger Mills County. And also Dewey County was the first to sign theirs. So I want to thank Dewey County too. Junior Salisbury, I know he had a big hand in that, and I appreciate that so much. So we're going to have Angel Cushing here. She's going to educate us, and she's from Kansas, and she's traveled 7.5 hours to be with us. So this lady's passionate, and it has happened to her, right? Mm-hmm. And she's going to tell you firsthand. So welcome, Angel. Thank you.
I was noting that she said it hasn't happened in Oklahoma yet. And I'm not saying that you folks might be a little bit smarter than your neighbors. Maybe you are, so now would be a good time to remind you that the Chiefs won. So thank you guys for coming out here tonight, and thank you for having me. I do appreciate it. My name is Angel Cushing. I'm just an old soldier's wife. I'm not anybody special. I've never had any formal speaking. I just talk to everybody like they're in my living room. That's the kind of person I am, and I haven't been afraid to do it. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to kind of give a presentation to take you step by step so you don't get lost and confused. And then afterwards, I think Sandy's going to come up and announce the next meeting, and then right after that we'll go immediately into questions and answers. There's no such thing as a bad question. I can handle them. My husband is a retired Army from Fort Riley, Kansas. He did 25 years. I gotta figure this thing out again. Forgive me. So he did 25 years in the Army. There, I think I got it. He did 25 years in the Army and we retired out of Fort Riley. Home is Nebraska. But we figured out that Concordia, the snow starts to melt. So we tried to stay a little bit south of that. We retired out of Fort Riley and we bought us a little acreage where our plan was to ride horses all over the national parks, all over the country. He's got a nice little place to fish out of. It's an old rock quarry with a pond right there in the center. It's nothing big, not enough for cows, but enough for goats. And rock quarries grow weeds and brush pretty well. So it feeds goats really nicely, and I used that money to pay for the horses and stacked a freezer full of meat. So in 2009, he went to a local breakfast at the local community center. They have them in the mornings. And he came home and he said, "Sweetheart, I ran into this old timer. And he wants to put a letter to the editor in the local newspaper, but he's afraid to put his name on it." And so he was looking for somebody to do that. And this letter was pretty outrageous. I mean, it said a lot of things. That you had to have a special use permit if you were going to feed more than 2 animals, right? It was going to eliminate all barbed wire fencing, all electric fencing. I mean, it was a homeowners association on the entire county. You had to have a special use permit if you were to run your business out of your home. And it was detailed. So that meant grandma, if she sold any of her quilting and she pulled it out onto the dining room table, it was going to be worthy of a search warrant and a knock on the door. It was nuts. I call these regulations vague regulations that are strictly enforced. And this kind of describes to you how this comes down to be and how it found us in the county, this little sheet right here in the front. And this is how I got into it. This is how I should back up and explain to you that Lyon County isn't plowed ground. Lyon County is the Flint Hills. We grow fat rocks and fat cows there. This is not plowed ground area. This is all ranch land area. So they are banning barbed wire fences in an entire county. So I started investigating as to how this happened. And how this happened is that our county did a joint comprehensive planning and zoning with the city. And it gave the city land use policy control over the county because the planning commissions and the zoning boards are stacked with the majority in favor of the city. So it steals all the representation from everybody in the rural area. And that's how these plans come into place and they stay in place. Now every state is a little bit different as to how this mechanism works. In Kansas we have what's called regional councils. And this is where the federal government brings grant money straight down to the local county commissions, and they stand in front of the local commissions. Each county commissioner, each county has a commissioner if they participate in a regional council that's assigned to go to those meetings. And then they bring back the ideas, and then they bring back the people to help sell those ideas to the rest of the commissioners. I have to tell you, when I first found out they were trying to ban barbed wire fences, and I went to that first meeting, it was like 2 days before they were scheduled to vote on it. I stood in there, I had made a Facebook post and said, "Hey guys, do you know this is what's going on?" And when I went in there, this little old lady got up there and she said, "You know, I haven't had the time to read these and I don't understand them, so please don't pass this right now." And one of the commissioners said, "You know, I'm aware of a Facebook post out there that is just a lie. It's not true. We're not trying to ban barbed wire fences. That's not going to happen." So I stood up there and I told him it was on page, I think it was, I don't recall the exact page, I think it was 52. It's on page 52. Here's where it is. He looked at me like I was nuts. I tried to convince them that there was no place in any of these regulations that said except for county commissioners. And at the end of the day, I was incredibly mad at them. But after going into 30 by 30 and going to county commissioners and presenting in front of them in several states, I learned they're the first victims. They're not people to be mad at. These guys are conned by pros in environmental groups that have been doing this for 20, 30 years and passing on what works and what doesn't work onto the next people that take over and join these spots. Our county commissioners are just working folks just like us, right? Pulled right out of our communities. They don't stand a chance against these pros unless they're told that it's coming their way. I know to this day, our county commissioners would never have banned barbed wire fences. Never. They were lied to and they were conned. And that's how it works. You guys are the most powerful people on the planet, and that's why you're targeted for these ideas. So right here in my hand is a resolution by Colorado, because all of my copies from Dewey County and Roger Mills County is within your hands, and I ran out, so all I got up here left is Colorado. What I'm asking your county commissioners to do is pass a resolution against 30 by 30. What that does, at a very, very minimum, what it is eyewitness testimony on behalf of the landlord or any landowner, sorry, not landlord, on behalf of any landowner should they get in trouble. So imagine, in court, Your Honor, my county said, this right here. It's very powerful, cheap, cost the county nothing to create eyewitness testimony on behalf of a landowner. So I ask your county commissioners to do that. Please take extra copies of this stuff to give to them, to help them reach that conclusion and make that decision. When I dealt with the banning of barbed wire fences in Lyon County, I felt like I was hitting my head against the wall and nobody was hearing me, and everybody thought I was nuts. It can't possibly be true. It would never happen in Kansas. And then one day I got a phone call from a state representative named Tatum. She called me up and she said, Angel, do you have a national heritage area over you? I said, no, the what found us has nothing to do with national heritage area. It's all down to the regional councils. She said, I don't know. Some of these zoning regulations, they're a common complaint of national heritage areas. Well, come to find out, my county, at the time that they were adopting the comprehensive planning and zoning regulations, they were trying to join a neighboring national heritage area. To put that in perspective, a national heritage area is federal jurisdiction voted on by Congress. This is Freedom Frontiers, my neighboring county's land management plan. It comes with a federal land management plan over all those acres of 41 counties. And my county was trying to join that national heritage area at the time that they were doing these planning and zoning regulations. So Tatum put me in touch with a fellow named Norman. This is his book. He had beat back one of these, not on his own, but he helped beat back one of these out in Colorado. And because it was COVID, he knew that there was one going up in northern Kansas and southern Nebraska, so he created this book, which is really not a book. He calls it a book. It's more like a college class. It is all evidence of everything, every thing that they copied, every resolution that was passed, every letter written to the editor. It's a book full of evidence, really is what it is. And he sent it to every county commissioner in the Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Area Partnership that involved 49 counties. And then I started looking into the National Heritage Area, and I saw how it weaved into the zoning. And then I noticed how it's weaving into the Conservation District offices there in Kansas. So I got asked to do a meeting which was totally not on the subject whatsoever. And I stood in front of this crowd full of farmers and I said, hey, by the way, if you are taking any money or filling any contracts to clean riparian areas in your pastures, congratulations, you're mapping trails. And I shocked the room. And after that, we made some arrangements. More people wanted us to come speak. So Norman and I and Maiwa and a few other people, we did a tour over 9 days in the counties throughout those 2 states. And we just informed people of the National Heritage Area that was coming in. And of those 49 counties, 45 counties passed a resolution not wanting to participate in that National Heritage Area. And it worked. They went away. They dropped their pursuit of that National Heritage Area. So it does work. Those resolutions also got us a hearing in the state of Kansas. Now, I don't want to give Casey Murdoch, too much credit because he's from Oklahoma and I'm from Kansas. But it is coincidental, I'm sure it's coincidental, that after Casey Murdoch has introduced this legislation here in Oklahoma, we now have interest up in Kansas. So I got an email just today asking if there was some legislation that had been introduced in Kansas yet. So these work, the resolutions work, they listen to the counties, they're hearing the counties. So they want to be in assistance of the counties. So if you do anything tonight, is to leave here, contact your county representatives or your county commissioners and ask them to pass a resolution against 30 by 30. So now we were informing the Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Area Partnership people that this was going into there. We accidentally informed people in Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area. When I say accidentally, we did not intentionally want to direct attention there because that National Heritage Area has been there since 2006, and we all know that when a federal government program goes in, it's almost impossible to fight back. But my phone started ringing off the hook. And the most heartbreaking one was from a Coffee County commissioner who called me up and said, Angel, if we pass a resolution against the Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Area Partnership, would it help get the ball rolling? And I said, sir, you're in the National Heritage Area. He said, what? No, I'm not. I said, yes, you are. You're in the National Heritage Area. So I found myself in front of that county commission talking to them about the National Heritage Area they didn't even know they were in. When my phone rang, the number one question that I got was, does this have anything to do with the zoning regulations that are getting more strict, or if there was a county or people that didn't have zoning regulations, is this the reason why they're talking about getting zoning regulations? That was the number one question that I took from people in the National Heritage Area. The number two question that I took was, why wasn't I told that a boundary had been drawn around my property without my knowledge? Here's the thing. The federal government requires that they tell you. They're supposed to tell you. In fact, they go in front of Congress and they tell the Congress that you want this. This is for you. You've been demanding it. When I went to the convention, just so that I could talk to each and every single representative in the state of Kansas that night, I walked up to Representative Tracy Mann and I told him all about the Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Area Partnership, and he said to me, Angel, you're telling me they're lying to me. And the answer is yes, they are. We got the Freedom of Information request on Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Area Partnership, and we learned that they've been lobbying for 5 years before anybody knew. And in their own minutes, somebody asked, should we start making public meetings and letting the people know? And the director said, or one of the board members said, no, not until the required feasibility study. So how these feasibility studies go is they tend to put an ad in the newspaper and then they invite their friends, and 35 people that they know show up, and then that's what they then take to Congress and say, look, here's our meeting. These are all the people that showed up that want this. So that's how these programs come in. For Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area, this is a money-making interest. So every dollar that they raise, they can tell the federal government that they got this donation and the federal government will match it. It's a 50% match. So what they did was, this Freedom's Frontier was created by historical entities in Douglas County, Kansas, and they went to the county commission, and the county commission then writes a check for something in the county, and then Freedom's Frontier takes that check and they claims that donation to the federal government, and then they get matching funds from the federal government. So of their budget, half is from the federal government, half is from either Douglas County or State Wildlife and Parks or some other government entity. They are not privately funded. Less than 2%, I think they said, was privately funded. So this particular National Heritage Area didn't get out of Douglas County for 14 years. In fact, they didn't even put up signs. We did find, though, in their paperwork that they had an employee that they paid $75,000 a year to for putting up signs. When we went to Coffee County Commission and we mentioned that to them and we showed them that paperwork, Then signs started going up shortly after that, and they're still going up all over in the area. And I can say that they are spreading their donation dollars out a little bit more beyond Douglas County, and if you get on their website, they love you, they love private property rights, and everything's wonderful, everything's okay. So how did these heritage and historical schemes come into popularity? So I wanted to know that question. And the homework that I did was based on something that the National Heritage Area kept saying. And that was President Ronald Reagan loves this, Angel, so you should too. I was a kid when he was elected. But I went and checked. Why did Reagan like this? Well, Reagan came into the presidency during the Sagebrush Rebellion. And one of the ways that he won that campaign was to take the side of the landowners out in western states. He was for the Sagebrush Rebellion. At that time, Arkansas was building a park along a river, and on our news stations, along with what was going on in Vietnam, was grandmas and grandpas being ripped out of their shacks and having heart attacks as their lands were eminent domain. So eminent domain was quickly falling out of popularity at the same time that Ronald Reagan was campaigning on behalf of the Sagebrush Rebellion. National Heritage Areas was a compromise. We won't eminent domain anymore as long as we can do these National Heritage Areas. Reagan said okay. Since then, 55 of these have come up in the country. The entire state of Tennessee is a National Heritage Area. So the significance of that in all of this into 30 by 30 is to tell you the tools are already there. Infrastructure is there. Army is built, the tanks are loaded, it's already there. And every department has now been directed to implement 30 by 30. So one of the ways that they are doing this is through the tools that they have. I talked to a man named Ben. He's the director of Blue Mountain Coalition out in the western states. So they're a legal office that fights to keep land open in national parks. He said he'd been involved in this since the 1980s. He said, can you name a national park where there's a campground or a trail or grazing rights or something? Have you recalled any that has ever been expanded? Boy, I thought about that. I have to do a lot of homework on that one. He said there hasn't been. There hasn't been. Not since Blue Ribbon Coalition came up in the 1980s has there ever been an expansion of public use of anything in the national parks. What they're doing is squeezing down that land. So this land here, in this map, all of this white is private property. All of this color is government property, or what the federal government claims as their property. All of that is. That's why I wanted to have you take a picture, and if you didn't get a chance to do this after the meeting, you'll want to take a picture of that. The website is an interactive map, and you can scroll all the way down into your neighborhood. So they're closing this up and shutting this off to public access. So that's you and me. That's hiking, camping, picnics, grazing. There are some places where there's water rights for towns that are being squeezed. I'm told that the National Park Service land and federal land down here, they're not even allowing the Border Patrol in there. It's getting really, really strict and hard. Now, they're not cutting it off to anybody, because if you get on U.S. Fish and Wildlife site, you will see bids for any commercial hunting and fishing outfits that they can bid into. So only if you're very wealthy and you can afford a commercial hunting and fishing vacation, you might be able to get out there and use those national parks once 30 by 30 is complete. So what happens when they get all that land squeezed down? Well, most of us are not willing to give up our recreation. So that's where all of these other programs come into play. As these parks get squeezed out of public access to feed the need for recreation, they're going to start and have started squeezing on some of these programs to allow more public access. A good example of that is conservation easements. Once upon a time, they told you if you put your land in a conservation easement, no public access would be granted. Now you'll find a lot of these land trusts are allowing public access. You see a lot of news articles about the corner issue. How many here is familiar with the corner issue? This is where there's a big fight up at the Supreme Court about whether or not the public can cross the corner of a private property to access public property. Do you know why that's an issue? Because it's being bottlenecked. There's so much land that's being closed off that people are starting to bottleneck into harder to get to areas. Naturally, that's to the benefit of the National Park Service. They want those hunters and fishermen to harass those landowners, encourage them to sell. So those areas are never closed off. So the other tool is in regard to these national heritage areas and heritage programs. We came across an article by the president of the Heritage Foundation. So these national heritage areas, they have these regions, they get together in meetings, and they elect a board and they elect a president. And that president is in charge of going to the National Park Service and saying this is what we need for the national heritage area. The National Heritage Area president wrote an article that I think was called the Land Observer or something like that. She stated that now is the time to make all national heritage areas National Park Service units. So those colors, to turn all national heritage areas into federal land. Remember, the entire state of Tennessee is a national heritage area. I don't know that that's going to happen. You know, I'm surely that there isn't any congressman that'd be stupid enough to do that. They're all not going to, right? So, I'm sure they're not going to if they hear from you. They got to get involved. Those county commissioners have to pass a resolution. Most of the state of Nebraska, thanks to Governor Pete Ricketts, has passed a resolution against 30 by 30, which is fantastic. Yet here we are still dealing with it, right? It helps. It made a difference. It poked them back a little bit, but it's still not enough. There's 50 states in this nation. All of us need to get involved and try to get as many counties to pass a resolution as possible. That is the reason why I'm here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about these maps back here. So I told you about the federal land here. This one here on the side is conservation easements. So this too is an interactive map that you can scroll all the way into the neighborhood. So it kind of gives you an idea that maybe there isn't that much until you scroll into your neighborhood. There's quite a bit. Now you should know that's only federally recognized conservation easements. There's a lot of privately held conservation easements out there that are not on this map. So what a conservation easement is, to me, is becoming a tenant on your own property. I, for the life of me, can't see why anybody would want to do that. You're becoming a tenant on your own property. What you need to know is unless it's in the contract, they can sell that conservation easement, whoever owns it. Sold and traded just like mineral rights. The Nature Conservancy, their 93% of their budget is buying other conservation easements. What's important to consider is back in my county, Chase County, Kansas, is Tall Grass National Prairie Preserve. Only 30-some acres are owned by the federal government. More than 10,000 acres are owned by the Nature Conservancy. And they're gobbling up conservation easements around it. So what's going to happen is simply waiting for the right president and the right Congress to come along and declare that a monument. And they'll donate it all to the federal government. There is a 99-year lease as the condition of the sale to the Nature Conservancy of those 10,000 acres. I think that's the only reason why it hasn't been petitioned as of yet. So the other problem that I have with conservation easements is you're making decisions for people that haven't been born yet, 500 years from now. And if you think about how far our country has come since 1776, right? How far it's come since the 1500s. I mean, it's come a long way. Our technology and food production and soil conservation is just wow. Can you imagine what it is in 500 years? So why would you do that to anybody for 500 years from now? I actually saw one of these contracts that were for beyond the collapse of the United States. That conservation easement was to stay. I thought, gee, how that's going to get enforced? That'd be interesting. So one of the laws that Casey Murdoch is looking at is to allow county commissioners, it's based off of Nebraska's law, is to allow county commissioners to have a vote on conservation easements. So if you have a lot of conservation land in your county that maybe you're not getting taxes on, and you know that additional conservation easements is going to deplete that tax rate even more, it gives you the opportunity to say no. It will not keep any conservation easements that are already there. It won't do anything with them. But it will give the county commissioners a little bit more control about how much land should be pulled out of production. Pulling land out of production is important. So this map over here is CRP land. To put that into perspective, each of these dots is 1,000 acres. So if you look at that, that's a lot of land that's been pulled out of production. I had a conversation with a candidate against Chuck Schumer in New York City, and we did this interview. And she said that, what about the population? I mean, the population is so big, we're going to run out of food. No, if you think about all that CRP land and all that federal land, yeah, there's some grazing on some of it, a little bit of production. All that CRP land, if you combine all of that, you combine the cities and the seasons, I figure probably only 15% of the United States is in food production at any given time. Yet we produce so much that we convert it to fuel. We can feed the world if we were allowed to. The more interesting thing about this map, and so that website there, it isn't an interactive map, but they do update it every 3 months, so this is a little bit out of date. The good news is that it is shrinking up, not a lot, but the amount of conservation easement land is down just a little bit since the announcement of 30 by 30. But March of 2022, an USDA email went out to Nebraska farmers, and it was forwarded to me, in which USDA was bragging that they now have so much land in conservation along this strip here, in conservation easements, that they've created a wildlife corridor. So what happens to your property when it gets designated a wildlife corridor? You should probably look further to those western states to see how that goes. So these maps down here, these photos down here, these are images of the Joint Comprehensive Plan that tried to go in my county. Do you remember the story of the little girl that got a ticket for selling lemonade because she didn't have a permit? Okay. So the idea of that is that unless it's specifically said you can do A, B, and C, if it's not A, B, and C, then you have to have a permit. So that's vague regulations. It's called form-based zoning. So that's what was written into our regulations. And I used firearms as an example to show people in the city that this affects you too. Because Kansas law says that you have the right to sell or repair firearms in your house, but these regulations would have banned that. Kansas has what's called home rule, which means sometimes they don't have to follow the state's recommendations. So another part of that is language, and that's what this sheet here signifies. I really wanted to show you language. Sorry guys, on the mic. So the second sheet here is language. This is important because I kept going into my zoning administrator and I said, why are you calling farmland landscape, agricultural landscape? And he said, that's no big deal. That's just a new way to describe your property. So I looked it up because I'm a literal thinker and I know the courts are too, right? So I looked it up, and the only place that I could find it defined was in an animal rights activist group that defined it as a 40-acre plot with a row of trees, preferably nut trees to feed the animals, right down the center of it. And I kind of laughed at that, silly guys, my goodness. They haven't seen the size of our equipment, have they? It would all be if I didn't find it in Hebron, Nebraska. That's what that picture is. The government used it, but they hadn't defined it. The other words were defined by the government. So green space, environmental justice, riparian areas, open space, legally defined as public land. So if you accept that and allow that to be used long enough, and it gets set in stone in paperwork long enough, then the courts are going to side with whoever is saying your land is public land. That's important to know. There's a word you have to watch for in any type of planning regulations that are coming up, in any type of contracts that you have. You don't want those words in there. So this other sheet here, it just so happens that the zoning regulations in my county were authored by a company called Urban Collaborative out of Portland, Oregon. I'm sure it's a coincidence that the zoning administrator for the city of Emporia was also from Portland, Oregon. They come down through the Flint Hills Regional Council. The author, Zoe Anton, had a company on the side called Craft Crickets, and that's what those pictures are there. It's from that website before she cleaned it up a bit. And this is how livestock was ruining the earth, polluting the environment, and the future of protein is bugs. Now imagine me seeing this in 2019. I was pretty sure I was in the Twilight Zone. Now it seems to be common knowledge. It's all everywhere, right? All right. So, is there anything else that you'd like me to cover before I...
Well, we wanted Angel mainly talk about the National Heritage Areas tonight, but we've got another problem that is like under the National Heritage Areas, right? It's the Chisholm Trail and the Great Western Trail, which runs Dewey County. Like I had some friends give me a map last night of the Great Western Trail. So if you don't know where the Great Western Trail is, and if it affects your property or the Chisholm Trail property, we're going to have a meeting on that. They're trying to get the trails that went through Oklahoma, the cattle trails, they're trying to get them in the National Park Service. So if they do that, so there's already a new bill. So in January of 23, a bill 247 on the House side was filed to put the Chisholm Trail and the Great Western Trail in the National Trail Park System. So that's already there. Yeah, oh, there's a map. Okay, she's got a map on the back of that where those trails are. Okay, all right. Oh, and a copy of the bill right there, page 247. So if they put that in the park system, guess what that means? People are going to come on your land. They can ride horses. They think they can do whatever, right?
Do you want me to explain that?
Yeah.
So this is explained best by a school teacher that I know who actually made that graphic for me to share with you. So this was an issue a few years ago, and I first learned about it from Pete Ricketts, Governor Pete Ricketts. And the school teacher got on it, and so did Kansas Natural Resource Coalition, and we thought that this went away. Until very, very recently, we have discovered that this bill had been introduced. Now the language is tamed down quite a bit. It says it's going to protect your property rights and everything's going to be hunky-dory and you're going to love it. But what she wanted me to tell you is that unless they knocked on your door, they have absolutely no right to nominate your property even for yard of the month without your permission. She says the problems that they have found, and they have some public land next to them, is that once it goes on the National Park website, people aren't going to read the law first. They're just going to assume this is where they want to travel and going to check out. So that is an issue, and it is a threat to you. The most disturbing thing to me is it's going through Congress. So today I got an email from one of their board members who corrected me and said, we are not going to be under the National Park Service. Great. Then why do you got a law? Why are you passing the law and why are you putting it on the National Park Service website? That trail ain't going anywhere. It's been there since it was used. Anybody can knock on anybody's door. It's right there on the map. You can see it. You can drive by and say, oh, this is where the cattle were at one time. It doesn't require law. It does not require anybody entering your property, and it definitely doesn't require a designation without your permission. The most important question she asked is, what's in it for you? We know what's in it for them, right? Tourism. What's in it for you, the property owner, to have this designation on your property? These are all things to consider as this legislation moves forward. Again, that 30 by 30 resolution is going to help considerably.
So this is the issue. We're going to have another meeting to get all our information on the Chisholm Trail, and people that own land in these trails need to be aware of this and push back from, so that's why I wanted your contact information to spread this, because we got to stop this. I mean, I was in a banquet in Dewey Canaliti last night. They have these pictures of these monuments 2 miles north of Leedy in the fence line saying the Great Western Trail 4 miles east of here. Well, 4 miles east from that fence line is into somebody else's property. So if they read that, what's going to stop them from going into that property and thinking they own it? I mean, that's just, we've got to push back. And we appreciate Angel being here to do that. And like I said, Linda Murphy and I and Angel, we're going to start informing people, and we're going to go to, we don't have it set yet, but that's what we wanted their information for, was to figure it out, because this has kind of all come up just since we scheduled this meeting. The trails and all that has just come up. So we're going to open it up for questions to, you can ask Angel, and then I will get back with you when we get a meeting scheduled on, and get some more information on the Chisholm Trail and the Great Western Trail.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Which Congress people do they need to get hold of to tell them, to contact
Well, the
them?
first thing they need to do is pass a resolution in their counties against 30 by 30. That's the first thing that needs to happen. If you're up for letter writing, contact my Kansas representative, because those are the ones that introduced it. Ron Estes, Jake LaTurner, which is my representative, and what was the other one? Sharice Davis. Jake LaTurner was a little bit interesting. I did have a conversation with him this past weekend, because he supported the passage of Senate Bill 1942. Have you heard of that? It was passed in lame duck session on December 22nd. And what that does is give more control of these national heritage areas over to the Department of Interior. Department of Interior is not liking that these land management plans have been sitting on the shelf and only being implemented partially. So Senate Bill 1942 gives the Department of Interior, through the National Park Service, more direct power over those board members and how that money is spent in those national heritage areas.
Okay. Is it working? Okay.
Yes.
I just found my friend right around the corner here, former Senator Jake Barrett.
Be the first question.
Sure. Well, thank you for this. I walked in a little bit late, but it's also good, and I appreciate this. I was curious about the global effort, because I read that 50 other countries were involved in this. And so I was wondering if you had any insight into how this has been tried in other countries, maybe even pushback and successful pushback maybe?
So that's really interesting. So I went to a meeting called the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition meeting. And if you don't know, that's pretty much an infomercial to sell policies. And the first one that I went to was where they proclaimed that they needed to improve beef genetics over in Africa, because Africa was going to be the breadbasket of the world. And then the second meeting that I went to was at Cargill in Wichita, Kansas. Now, if you don't know, Cargill's like, the biggest cattle trader in the United States. And I walked in the door and it said sustainable by 2030, right there in a sign when you walked in. Now, I don't like driving in cities, I must confess. forgive me, city folks, please forgive me. If you nearly ran over me, it was because it was probably me from the country. No, rush hour traffic is when the tiny little small town school lets out for me. So I leave early and I get there early, and that gives me a chance to talk to the help inside the building, and I got a tour after that meeting. So in Cargill, where they trade cattle all over the world, they have a kitchen where they're testing fake meat. So in this Global Leadership Coalition meeting, they were talking about how the world wants one-stop shopping, and the United States has too many governments. And we need to help with that. And that's not a coincidence. If you look at this plan here, what I discovered is that once this county is used to being subjected to the city for a really long time, then they start talking the county into eliminating elected positions. Here in Kansas this last year, we had a vote on a referendum in order to maintain the sheriff and keep him in Johnson County, because they were 2 or 3 years ahead in the Joint Comprehensive Planning and Zoning than Lyon County was. There are counties out in western Kansas where they've already started to eliminate the clerk and other elected positions. I went to a few other states, and in other states where the laws are a little bit different, they get the 2 cities to come together, and then they start combining those cities and removing elected positions between the 2 cities. So in that meeting, besides learning that, they said that famine was coming to Africa, Eastern and Western Africa. I thought, well, that's interesting. I raise goats. So I got onto the website, or all my Facebook friends, my groups for Boer goats, all my friends in Africa, and I say, hey guys, they're saying that you have a fertilizer shortage because of Ukraine and that you're hungry. I said, Angel, we're always hungry. But they also said your precious metals come from our mines, and guess what the byproduct is of those mines? Fertilizer. And by the way, sweetheart, we're below the equator. We ain't planting here. So they also said everybody is going to starve in Asia, Korea, those countries. Same thing. Apparently they get all of their fertilizer from Ukraine. So I went home and I asked my husband, who is in Korea, in his army career, and I said, sweetheart, what did they use for fertilizer? He said, nothing from Ukraine. They used human feces. Another animal feces. They're not. But I did notice that all of these countries that are starving happen to be member countries that have signed on to 30 by 30 and 50 by 50.
Can you hear me very good here? Hello? No?
Not very loud.
Not very loud, okay, maybe. Would you tell them about your radio show?
Sure, yeah.
Jacob, while he's here, I want him to talk about it. He has a new Freedom 96 something.
Yeah, it's on Freedom 96.9 FM, and just a blessing God gave me this platform coming out of the Senate, really to speak to the people across Oklahoma.
We're on
Yeah,
Facebook.
we have people live. So
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So, coming out of the Senate, I was just obviously asking the Lord about what's the next step, and He opened up this door for a radio show. It's the Jake Merrick Show on 96.9 FM, and so I get to speak to a large portion of the state, and you can access it via the app. You can download the Freedom 96.9 app. 7 a.m.? Okay, all right, thanks. So it can reach the whole state. You can go on the freedom969.com website and get the archive shows and stuff. But I've been talking about this since I was made aware of it, since you made me aware of it, and had Senator Murdoch on just the other day, and he said, I'll cover it briefly, but I won't get into the details just yet because I'm learning more. But I want to have you on, too, if possible, to at least give an overview to people and make them aware. Because since I had it on, I had a ton of messages saying, wow, I didn't know about this. And so we're making this known. My show is a state-focused show talking about the sovereignty of our person, our state, and our God. And so we want to emphasize state sovereignty, state powers, and the responsibility we all have to take care of our own freedom. And so that's what I emphasize. And so this is right in my alley. I think it's right on topic. And I think we need to let the whole state know So you're welcome anytime to come on and talk about it.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
Are you having any more meetings in Dewey County or Roger Mills County?
So the question is am I having any more meetings in Roger or Dewey County? Not that I know of, none have been scheduled yet.
What about Woodward County?
Not that, so this is the only one that's been scheduled for Oklahoma in the immediate future, but it can happen.
It can happen.
It can happen, yeah.
Trail goes by our place, right through it.
The trail goes by your place right through it.
Western Trail, Woodward
Okay.
County.
So I want you to take extra copies before you leave and give them to your neighbors. So I had a question way back there, yes.
Do we have to have a letter writing campaign to get our county commissioners to put this on a ballot?
So, I get asked that question a lot, and in the case of my zoning regulations, if you put it on the ballot, would the city vote to come fish out of my pond, camp on my ground? So I don't know that I want a ballot initiative. This is why I love being in a republic for that reason, because I have no doubt they would vote to come onto my property. But it may be a petition. I know that a few counties in Kansas that were a tad bit more stubborn and were reluctant to pass a resolution against 30 by 30 in Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Area Partnership. The people took up a petition. That might be more effective. I don't know enough about Kansas law to answer that correctly, competently, so I would refer you to Linda over here in the black shirt. Sorry, Linda.
April, you mentioned the Nature Conservancy and these conservation easements. I've been growing more suspicious of the Nature Conservancy. Up until recently, I've been a fan of these conservation easements, I thought, which brings me to back during the Obama administration. There were two areas I remember some controversy arose about these monuments. One was in South.
Hold on a second, I'm gonna bring the microphone to you.
I'm going to skip all that first part. But back during the Obama administration, I remember there were two areas, southeastern Utah. I think the other one was someplace in California where they were talking about these monuments. And I applied for elk licenses in Utah every year in southeast Utah. It was the same area where I played the elk hunt. And I was thinking, what's up with this monument? There's talk that they're going to ban public use in this area. It's a large area. It's near Monticello, Utah. And so...
Would that be Bear Ears?
I'm not familiar with Bears Ears. No, it's the South San Juan unit.
Okay.
And they were going to try and make it a monument. And it was unclear to me if they were going to shut off public access to it. I talked to the Utah Department of Wildlife about it, when I would apply for my elk license, and I would ask them that, is this still public use? And they never could give me a clear-cut yes. And I just thought, you brought that up tonight and it aroused my suspicions. Can you share anything on about that?
So I would recommend, if you want to find out who's being closed and where they're being closed and where the access is being closed on national park land, I would refer you to Blue Ribbon Coalition, their website. They do a fantastic job of keeping up on that. They file legal briefs to try to hold as much open as possible. I share those petitions whenever they share them with me. They're good people out there. But yes, I'm hearing that all over. I refer to Nature Conservancy, and they're not the only one. There's hundreds of conservancy programs out there. I refer to them as purchasing agents for the federal government. So I got a little history here recently from them, on them, that it was started by some very wealthy people who were out in their yachts, and they didn't like looking over at the shoreline and seeing buildings. And that park was not allowed to acquire any more land, so they came up with a scheme called conservation easements. And then the National Park Service director became the director of the conservation easement program in that area. He got his buddies in the IRS to make financial incentives to create even more conservation easements. And so the birth of conservation easements grew. This is not a new founding 1776 idea. This is relatively new, born out of World War II in the whole getting back to nature. And I have no problem with that. I live in the country because I love nature, right? We all like to use our public lands, right? We love them. But at what point does food production become important? How high does food have to get before it becomes important? There has to be some give and take. When is enough enough? Conservation easements I have a major problem with because you're making decisions for people that are not even born. That is not freedom. You're casting judgment on people that are not born yet. And I have heard horror stories of these folks being tortured after their land is in a conservation easement. And I'm sure you can probably find hundreds of YouTube testimonies on it. When they want the land and it's ready to be acquired, they just start harassing whoever is on there. And there's not much that people can do that are on there. They just end up moving off. So they're just bad all around. So I have a really hard time with any type of partnership with the federal government. That's Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area, these trail groups. All of these are non-profits that you cannot drop a Freedom of Information request on. You can't walk into their board meeting at any time and sit down there and watch. That's why the federal government uses them, because they can hide what they're doing behind them. So we have laws coming up in Kansas that are trying to create agricultural avenues in gasoline and capturing methane and natural gas. But by the way, it has to come with creating yet another nonprofit so that the federal government can do whatever they want. So laws need to be, I did hear that there are some laws in Congress now that the IRS reined in the rules a little bit. So what was happening is that investors were getting investment firms to buy conservation easements, and then they were writing that off, making tons of money and hiding tons of money in these conservation easements. So the rules are now starting to crack down on these investment firms that are investing in conservation easements and keeping them from trying to be a tax write-off, but it's not enough, and it's not stemming the flow. And at some point, we're going to get hungry. So in those U.S. global leadership meetings, they talked about Africa being the breadbasket of the world. We already import at least 35% of our food. That will increase incredibly as more and more land is pulled out of production.
So conservation easements go with the land, right? When there's land sold?
The conservation easements go with the land. So yes, that's a very good point. So I got asked if conservation easements go with the land. So yes, unlike even CRP goes with the land when it's sold. Unlike CRP, conservation easements are forever. They're perpetual. So once that land is sold, conservation easement goes with the new landowner. It drives down the property prices because who wants to buy land in which you're going to be a tenant on? So it tends to bring less value, which brings less taxes. Colorado had some nightmares there where they lost so much tax money in conservation easements that they actually went back to the landowners and asked them for more taxes.
Is the Fish and Game part of this deal?
Yes, so Fish and Game is in charge of, yes. So every branch under 30 by 30, every single branch of federal government is being used. So Fish and Game, what I have found, has joined in with the Flint Hills Legacy Program, and that comes down into Oklahoma some. And the Flint Hills Legacy Program is that, and this is our Flint Hills Regional Council document here, talks about how we need to save the grasslands and preserve them so that Fort Riley can do their job. And the best way to do that is through conservation easements. But yes, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, I know for a fact, are in Kansas working on the Flint Hills Legacy Program, trying to get as much land as possible in conservation easements. There's a Nature Conservancy office like right smack in the middle.
Angel, can you speak on the trust, the Kansas Land Trust?
The Kansas Land Trust, you mean
Explain how that works.
the Ranch Land Trust of Kansas? So, in In fighting this zoning regulations, we had an association, a cattle association, that just kind of watched our back. In fact, they're the ones that got rid of the banning of barbed wire fences. But after that, they disappeared and left us with this horrible homeowners association on the entire county. And I couldn't figure out why. Well, come to find out, that association, that cattle association, owns Ranchland Trust of Kansas, which is the partner with U.S. Fish and Wildlife for Flint Hills Legacy Program. So that's the other thing to know what your associations are doing. The good news is that enough pressure has been put on these organizations that they are starting to listen to their members. They are member organizations. So it's important that you know what the organizations you belong to are doing. That's a good question, thanks.
The Chisholm Trail one shows Frank Lucas as a co-author. Has anybody invited him to try to come explain some of this? Because I'm kind of surprised that he would do that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Here, let me let you say that.
Well, I just, has anybody asked Frank Lucas to come speak? This would not be something I would have expected him to do.
Okay, I know for a fact in 2019, right? In 2021, he filed the
Yeah, I
yeah,
believe
for
it.
that. He did that. He's not on the new one,
Okay,
but we had a town hall meeting with Frank Lucas in Elk City, Oklahoma, a year ago in November, and we couldn't get anything out of him.
okay.
So I think maybe everybody here needs to contact him.
He's got some more coming up, don't he?
I don't know. I don't know, but I think maybe you need to get his number, and maybe everybody needs to ask him.
He's got a town hall in March here.
He does have a town hall in March here in Elk City. You have that information?
I've got that information.
You have that information, okay? Brady, what?
Yeah, in just a moment.
Okay, all right.
Tom Cole co-sponsored that as well.
Tom Cole, yes, that's right. Tom Cole did co-sponsor those bills in 2021 and 19, right?
So I have to warn you and remind you, not warn you, remind you that these guys are victims, okay? They're the first victims. Remember, Tracy Mann said to me, Angel, you're telling me they've been lying to me. And I found out it was for 5 years. They have been lobbying Congress for 5 years. So if these guys are told, Frank Lucas and all these representatives are told, this is what you want, and there isn't anybody to tell them otherwise, what would they think? They would think that this was a good idea, it must be what you want. So it's important that you politely tell him that this is not what you want and what you're interested in. Now, if you would like to yell at my Kansas representatives, please do so. You're more than welcome to do so. They were told, they do know that this is not popular, and they went ahead and introduced the legislation again anyway. Any other questions? Sure.
So this trail deal, is that any different than like where the state of Oklahoma's Fish and Game Department is buying up this land like south of Eric, they bought 5,000 plus, you know, the Sandy Sanders deal. Is that any different than what's going on? Is that federal?
So every tool is being used to work in the direction of 30 by 30. And you're going to have states and other entities that are going to jump on the bandwagon because birds of a feather flock together, right? So the question was a particular expansion going on here in Oklahoma. The short answer is without looking at it directly, I don't know. But the long answer is that pretty much all of these expansion projects are falling into 30 by 30. So, any other questions?
The lesser prairie chicken, have you heard anything about that?
Yep, we've heard about the lesser prairie chicken. My best resource of where I get information on that is Kansas Natural Resource Coalition. They're absolutely fantastic. I know that Chris Kobach has filed a lawsuit, which is the Attorney General for the state of Kansas, to try to fight that back. I know that Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area, if you read their land management plan, I'm pretty sure that when that gets enforced, they're going to come after southeast Kansas and western Missouri using endangered species. So yes, that is part of 30 by 30. There is a lot of talk about a land management plan. Now, is that going to be through your conservation district, or is that going to be through U.S. Fish and Wildlife? Nobody knows for sure, but there's a lot of rumors. Now, once that goes into effect, farmers are going to be required to submit land management plans.
This 30-30 plan, do you have any evidence that it's being pushed forward by the United Nations or the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, there's a legislative site, and I believe it's called United. I don't remember. I don't recall it offhand, but I know that the site registers all the federal departments and it dictates what they are doing. And underneath of there, it'll show you how the departments are implementing the sustainable. What is it? How many points? 17. What is it again? For the world, there's so many.
Sustainable development.
Yes, thank you. And there's like 15 sustainable development, 17.
It's all sustainability.
Yeah, so there's 17 points, and on that federal website, you'll see where they are listing them. It's on my Facebook page. So I have a Facebook page, Angel Cushing, and it is public. If you scroll back there far enough, I've taken screenshots of that website, and it'll show you on there and take it right to you, and it'll tell you how it's being implemented. At U.S. Global Leadership Coalition meeting, they stood on that stage and they talked about those policies and how they would be in line with whatever sustainable point that they were on. It's important to know who was in that room with me there at Cargill. I had the governor of Kansas, state representatives, federal representatives, the largest company CEOs in Kansas were all sitting there. So these are policy makers throughout the region that were being told, and this is how we're reaching sustainable development goal, whatever.
You might, can we expound on the Global Roundtable for Sustainability?
That might be a little much.
I can speak a tiny bit on it.
Well, if you do, you gotta come over to mine.
What? Say it again.
I said if you do, you're gonna come here.
I've been fighting this for like 12 years, and I recognized it with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. When I was on the Cattlemen's Beef Board, they were, the World Wildlife Fund came in and they started making policy, they started nudging and using our checkoff dollars to do that through the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And the 4 packers are part of that now. You mentioned Cargill, JBS, Marfrig, and National Beef. They're part of this globalization, sustainable market. They've got a market that, and then they also have a regulatory. They're demanding we follow the regulations that they set forth. So they formed a partnership, and it's USDA is in charge of your checkoff dollars. So it's like she said, all federal agencies. But that's for another time. But I'm going to inject that in there. And then they brought this U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef into our nation. So we're having to follow these global rules that are, and they're not following. We're having to do it. So I can back and talk on that, but it's important to know that.
So when you get on the news and you hear all kinds of excuses as to why meat is going up and why grocery prices are going up, it's deliberate, it's government pushed. This poor gentleman here, pick one, whoever starts shouting first.
A couple of things. We're active members of Custer County Farm Bureau and went to the convention representing Custer County. They were telling us about all these things, and one thing they told us is you better be careful when you sign up at the USDA and read the fine print, because they can take your land if you sign the wrong document. The other thing is that we border the National Wildlife Refuge out here between Hammond and Butler. They took 300 acres of our land in the mid-60s to help make that refuge. But the other day I pulled in thinking I was going to visit with my local highway patrolman, looked just like his vehicle. When I got up beside him right there in the refuge parking lot, it was a new tactical officer for the Fish and Wildlife Department in full battle gear. And I got to visit with him quite a while. He was a nice guy, but he's patrolling out here between Hammond and Butler and the refuge down at Lawton. He travels back and forth, and all he does is sit there and do paperwork. But what are they being used for? Are they associated with the new IRS agents or what?
Probably not. They're probably, if they're fishing wildlife, they're probably more in line with 30 by 30. And you have to remember that a lot of these guys probably don't even know that they are working in this direction. I'm glad that you're here. I am. The Kansas Farm Bureau board members that are at the county level are champions. Do you know one of these national heritage areas was beat back by a Kansas Farm Bureau board member in Yuma, Arizona? Wholeheartedly, he started hearing reports of ridiculous zoning regulations coming down. He informed the public that he got 700 people to a meeting. He ended up in front of Congress, asking Congress to reduce that national heritage area down to the federal land there, and they did. So you can fight these back. That's one of the things that we've been working on with this national heritage area. You had a question?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to bring up an awareness. There is also coming out of the World Economic Forum a new process called ESG.
Yep.
And if you don't understand what that means, you better dig into it, because they're going to dictate environmental, social issues as well as governance. They will overrule your local county commission.
So the comment was on ESG. Pay attention to ESG. That does tie directly into farm. I call it cap and trade on steroids, really, bottom line.
All right, I found out Frank Lucas is going to have a town hall the 21st and 22nd.
I'll give it to you real quick.
Okay. My memory's not very good from there.
So, February 21st, Elk City,
February 21st, Elk City,
3 to 4 p.m.,
3 to 4 p.m.,
320 West 3rd Street.
320 West 3rd. Is that here? That's here.
And February 22nd, Custer County.
February 22nd in Custer
10 to
County.
11 a.m., that's at Weatherford City Hall.
10 to 11, right?
Yep.
At the Weatherford City Hall.
I've been to one and nobody shows up. That's how I.
Well, everybody needs to.
So you have his complete attention.
That way we can get his attention, you know, and try. The gentleman back there with is Mark Wayne aware of this, or would he be?
So, to be honest with you, I haven't spoken with them directly about 30 by 30. I know that our narrative is we want to be in lockstep with you guys, the landowners, and anything we can do to push back against Biden and his overreach, we're all in. So I'll be around to give my phone number, my email. We want to work with you guys, so just let us know.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
One more thing.
Okay.
Washita County.
Okay, Frank's going to be in Washita County.
Also February 22nd.
Also February 22nd.
1 to 2 p.m.
1 to 2.
At 111 South Market Street in Cordell.
At 111 South Market Street in Cordell.
What was the time here?
The time here, what was that?
3 to 4.
3 to 4. And then also, Jake has we have one more question.
Now, I am a Custer County Commissioner, and I really think most rural county commissioners are going to be totally on board with this. Metropolitan, maybe not, but we think like you do, we need to educate, because I do nothing of this.
Do you want to come down here?
No.
Okay. So I thought maybe you wanted to speak to all the county commissioners in Western Oklahoma.
We're not going to be in an adversary position. We're on board with this. County commissioners are about as close to the people as you can get.
Exactly, yeah. We just all need educated. You know, that's the whole deal.
You mentioned approaching somebody kindly.
Yes, kindly.
Good approach. We don't know much about this.
Exactly. And even some of our representatives aren't aware, I think, you know. They need to know. So, Jake was wanting to speak with something that happened to him while he was in.
Yeah, I'd like to just address 3 things if I could. First, February 14th is tomorrow, which is Valentine's Day, but it's also a vote, and probably one of the most important votes of the state. So just like you showed up here, you have to show up to vote. It is the city council, the school board, these kinds of votes, and so that's what makes an impact on these kinds of issues, the local level. And so I've been reminding people every day on my radio show, remember, get your chocolates, get your flowers, get your reservation, and then go vote. And so we got to do that. The other thing is, just speak to the ESG real quickly. It is a push throughout Oklahoma. We have Google over in Pryor, and there was a push last year for Panasonic to come in. Well, meeting in caucus, the Senate caucus, Republican caucus, we had the CEO and other leaders of Panasonic come in where we could ask them questions. I'll vent just a little bit. After the governor had declared that it was at the 1 yard line, we just got to punch it through, and now we had a chance as the elected representatives to ask questions. So I had a big problem with that. That it should be nowhere near the 1 yard line until the elected representatives have a chance to question the company itself, in my opinion. But when we did have a chance to question the CEO, I had a chance to ask him directly, what do you think about ESG? And he said, oh, we love ESG. In his foreign accent. I mean, all for it. And you just take one Google search and you find that he's all for the LGBTQ movement. So the promise is 4,000 jobs. But my question is, that's 4,000 families that are now going to be influenced with this liberal indoctrination. And Pryor will be purple, and so will Eastern Oklahoma if we continue doing that. So I just caution everyone to beware of this effort to be a top 10 state while giving up our values. And so that's what I saw there, is a push for an economic, to rise economically, but to do it by stepping on our values and pushing them further down. So I had a big problem with that. Probably one of the reasons I'm not in the Senate right now. Another reason I'm probably not in the Senate right now is because concerning the wildlife, I was on the wildlife committee. And so Senator Thompson, who manages the budget for the state, you need to be aware of Senator Thompson because he manages the budget for the state of Oklahoma. And he is a self-professed moderate. And I am cautious about anyone who's a self-professed moderate. If you're a self-professed moderate, I'm cautious of you. So I just am. And so, because I believe certain things very firmly. And so when he wanted to give all authority to the Wildlife Committee, yeah, not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
But he wanted to give all authority to the Wildlife Committee for them to make their own standards and rules. And the justification was, well, it'll be sent through the Rules Committee and it'll be checked there. I'm like, by who? By someone who knows nothing about wildlife? And so you see the logic in that. So I voted no, and it killed the bill, and it did not get through committee last year. But I promise you, it's going to be tried to push through this year. So I would watch out for that, this attempt to hand all authority to the Wildlife Committee. He was not happy with me with that and made it known. So I would just... the freedom I can speak freely because I'm not in there anymore. But I think that we have to become aware. I wanted to make this known to you because these are some things we have to track because it's setting up the infrastructure to make sure this thing can happen. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
And Jake's show is the only conservative radio show in Oklahoma, right?
Pretty much.
Pretty much. So if you want to know what's going on conservatively, you need to listen to Jake. I listen to his podcast. Sometimes I don't catch him at 7 because I'm busy, but I'll go back and listen to the podcast. So it's good. And I forgot to tell you, Angel is going to be on Sean Wilson's Exploring Energy show in the morning. So Sean graciously invited her to speak. So I'm excited about that.
So on ESG, it's a whole big subject. It ties directly into 30 by 30, but it's kind of a big, huge arm of all of this. One of the things that I can't wrap my mind around is the trading of nature. If you get on New York Stock Exchange, put ESG in their search engine or nature in their search engine, part of ESG is to trade nature. So what that means as a landowner, how that works is that somebody buys stock in my goats, and I'm going to be rated as to how many electric vehicles I drive versus diesel, what I do with the manure, what kind of feed I use, and those investors can then call me up and say, look, you're losing me money, and so I'm going to get docked, kind of like a credit rating score, which makes it more difficult to do business. So it needs to be shot down wherever it is. The good news is it doesn't make anybody any money, the investor any money, So some of the big, huge firms are starting to pull out because they're realizing it's not making them money. The problem is that as it trickles down this way, it can do an awful lot more damage before anybody figures out that this isn't gonna work.
Could also do it through the banking side of it.
Yeah, the banking side of it, yeah. You know, the banks, if you were to pull out your credit card and you were to call them, what is your position on ESG, you'd be very disappointed in their response. So, all right, before I wrap this up, is there any other questions at all?
What's the name of your Facebook?
Okay, so the name,
All these people that are pushing for this, I mean, they eat every day. If they shut us down, where do they think it's gonna get their food from?
that's
They
a
ever thought of that?
million-dollar question that I have asked 1,000 times. Yes. Yes, $1 million question that I've asked 1,000 times. So the question was, don't these people that are pushing these agendas eat too? The answer is yes, and I don't know that they know where their food comes from. So my Facebook page is Angel Cushing. So whenever we get a resolution, I make it public so it cannot be denied. It also inspires other counties. So just in case Facebook takes us down, I also have a website called Western Region Property Rights Coalition.
Say that again.
So Norman Kincaid came up with that. It's really long, I blame him. It's called Western Region Property Rights Coalition. It is on this, this chalkboard over here if you want to take a picture of it, Western Region Property Rights Coalition. We have that same Facebook page. You can find me, Angel Cushing, online. I don't have that opened up to comments completely because there are some green folks that have found me and like to say really mean, ugly things, but it is public enough that you can see everything on there. So, go ahead.
One last thing from me. These bills that former State Senator Jay Merrick was talking about, I don't know how many of you have heard of Oklahoma Second Amendment Association, OK2A. You currently do not have a chapter here in this county, so perhaps if anyone would be interested in starting a chapter, come talk with me. We also have an app where you can follow these bills that are being pushed through by OK2A and liberty-minded bills. So
Roger Mills
I have
County
directions
doesn't
for
have one
that.
either.
Come see me after this if you're interested.
Roger Mills County doesn't have one either, right?
I have a map here of all the
I don't
counties.
think they do.
And actually, Roger Mills.
Well, I mean, is it John Salisbury? Has it got it kind of combined with Dewey
Yes.
County? Okay.
You're combined with three counties.
Okay.
Yes, but anyway, we would like to get an OK2A chapter in every county.
So for the microphone and people listening, they would like to get a 2A chapter in every county in Oklahoma. So if your county doesn't have one, find a OK2A member.
Just come see me after this.
Just come see you after the meeting, okay? So thank you guys very much for coming, and thank you for having me out here. If you haven't gotten any of this paperwork, come get it. Take some extra copies and give them to your neighbors if you would. I'd appreciate it.
Can we find those maps online?
Yes, you can. If you come up afterwards, take a picture of these maps. It has the websites on there where you can find them.
Okay, I appreciate Angel coming, y'all. Give her a hand. And I want to thank Andrea and Linda and everybody that helped put this together. Like I said, when we have another meeting about the trails, or we can get a group together and go nicely and talk to our representatives and try to help educate them as long as we're educating ourselves. We're all learning together. So it's all coming against us and to them also. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your time.